My name is Maggie Chetty. I'm the chair of the Easter Rising Committee in Scotland, the 1916 Rising Committee, Centenary Committee in Scotland, and we've had a whole number of events throughout the year, and we're very happy to be here tonight to launch this wonderful copy of Saothar, which is on sale outside. I hope you're going to buy a copy. It's £15 for this beautiful production and £20 for a hardback, and you'll see it out there. The other quite memorable thing that is going to be happening tonight is the unveiling of the James Fearon plaque, which is going to be unveiled here in the STUC, and that is going to take place shortly. And we'll hear more about James Fearon from Francie just now. I'm happy to present to you Jack McGinley, who is the president of the Irish Labour History Society, and Francis Devine, who's a well-known musician and labour historian who's joining us tonight. We're very happy to have them. And of course we'll have Stevie Coyle, our secretary, who's done a lot of historical work on the Irish community in Scotland. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Jack if he'll kick off for us, please.
Thank you. Over 25 years ago, I joined the Labour History Society as an ordinary lay member, and in the years afterwards I held a number of officer positions until the time that I followed Francie as president of the society. And I put in a 4-year stint, which in 2002-03 ended up with the Irish Labour History Society hosting the International Conference of the International Association of Labour History Institutions. It was a big gig. It was held in Liberty Hall, and among the highlights were the fact that our IT lines didn't work, and we had to move the conference around over 2 to 2.5 days. And a colleague from a German labour history institution said, it's only the Irish that would get away with this, the way you were able to move people around. But I think one of the things about it was the then Prime Minister of Ireland, Bertie Ahern, who later became a socialist, came on the last morning, Friday morning, and he was photographed with all the delegates on the stairs outside of Beggar's Bush, which is where the premises of the Irish Labour History Society is. And the funny thing about Beggar's Bush is that in 1922, Beggar's Bush was the army barracks for the British Army, who had assassinated James Connolly on the 12th of May 1916, handed over the barracks, took down the British insignia and flags, and handed over the barracks to the Irish government, and effectively left the Republic of Ireland for all time, with the exception of holding on to the ports for war efforts. And in 1973, when the Irish Labour History Society was founded, Francie was among the people with great foresight who set it up. We were able to get a lease on Beggar's Bush, and we have been there ever since. And shortly after that conference, I felt that my work was done, and I stood down. And I was followed by the late Hugh Gertie, a very, very nice man who was looking forward to 5 years of active service as president of the Labour History Society, and published a book on one of the people associated with 1916, a man who died in 1917. And sadly, Hugh died very suddenly. And then a colleague of ours, Francis, worked for SIP2. I'm a member of City's National Executive Council, and I'm standing down in 2 weeks' time after 12 years on the Executive Council. And Brendan Bourne became the president, and Brendan had been an officer for 6 years. And close to 3 years ago, I got a phone call one day to say there's nobody standing to be president of the society, and Brendan is insistent that this time he's standing down for health reasons. And I said, well, if you're really, 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 really stuck, I will do a short term. And I said, I mean a short term. I'm not doing 5 years ever again. And I said, if I do it, I'm going to do it my own way, because unlike previously, I haven't been sitting at committee meetings for the last 10 years. So I said, we're going to do things expeditiously. And I said, we're going to do things. We're not going to talk about doing things. As I said, I'm sick of going to meetings where people talk endlessly about the reasons why things can't be done. So we had that AGM, and we were on the cusp of organising an autumn conference for 2014, which we ran, which was about the First World War. We had some very good academic speakers. And then and the previous year, while I wasn't president of the society, I was one of the leaders of running a Centenary conference on the lockout of 1913, along with the Irish Labour History Society, SIP2 Equality, History Ireland, and the Women's History Association of Ireland, because we wanted it to be a bigger event. We wanted to try and put the hand out, as I'm going to do later on in this speech, to you here. And the reason for that was people tend to get cocooned into their own little cluster, and you end up with events that are the sum of the whole, but because the whole is so small, they just don't make the effect, and they don't get the coverage. So we started planning the 2015 conference, and we called it 1915, on the cusp of the revolutionary year. And I knew the only way to have a successful conference was to ask the President of Ireland to deliver the opening paper. And after a lot of engagement, we finally got him. And the funny thing was, of all the sessions, we ran it on Friday night, all day Saturday and Sunday morning. Of all the sessions, his was the least well attended. There were only 80 odd people at it. During the Saturday morning and afternoon, Saturday morning had a session on Connolly. Francis spoke at that conference as well. There were close to 200. And there's a small book outside on Rosie Hackett, after whom a bridge was named in Dublin. And this was a big event because it was a coalition of feminists and trade unionists who actually wanted the 17th bridge over the Liffey to be named after a woman, because the other 16 had all been named after men. And we achieved that, and we launched that book at that conference. And on the Sunday morning we had a special session, which was only attended by 20 people. But it was a focus on what we call a youth workers network, to try and tell us what their view of history was, what they knew about labour history, and what they might be saying to a conference in 5, 10 or 20 years. So we did that. And at the same time, I was having an internal battle with my own committee about how we were going to commemorate James Connolly, the man who was executed on the 12th of May 1916, and how Irish labour history was going to remember James Connolly. So the following Monday night I went into the meeting and we had a discussion about it for 40 minutes or so, and I said, I found a solution to our conundrum. I said, we're going to have SARE 41, we're going to launch it on the evening of the centenary of the day when James Connolly was executed. We're going to launch it in Liberty Hall because that's where the proclamation was printed and where James Connolly stored some of the arms and where the flags that were used in the rebellion were stored as well. And I said, furthermore, I'm going to ask somebody who is well versed in the history of the society, to guest edit Saothar 41. And if the committee is prepared to give me backing on this, I'm going to give that person, whoever he or she may be, the comfort of being in a position to choose fellow editors. And I'm also going to say that the budget for Saothar is going to be doubled for this special issue. Now, we had never previously published a colour cover. All of the print had been black, white and red, and mainly black and white, and a bit of grey. And I approached Francis, and Francis considered it for a while. And he came back with the good news that yes, he was prepared to come back, having been an editor of Saothar previously, and that he would have conversations with people. And I was coming out of the Gate Theatre at about 10 to 11 one Friday night with my wife, and I got a phone call, a missed call from Francis, and when I rang him, he said, I found two fellow editors, Brian Hanley, who's a well-known historian, particularly on the Sinn Féin period in Irish history, and more importantly, Sarah Ann Buckley, a young researcher who was employed in the National University of Ireland in Galway. So we set off on the journey in producing Saothar 41. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Saothar is one of the two words that are used in Ireland for work. So it's one of the Irish versions for work. The other is Uber. And coincidentally, in our early days, we did have a magazine called Uber. So after a lot of toing and froing, Saothar 41, the pieces were in, and Francis set about the process of getting it all to printer and all those good things. And we met the timetable. And 3 weeks later, we published a small pamphlet that's outside by a man called Paul Ennis on his granduncle, Peter Ennis, who was the caretaker in Liberty Hall during those years and further years. And in that, there's an exposition of the Helga coming up the Liffey and bombing Liberty Hall. There's also documentary evidence about the officer training corps at Trinity College, where I happen to be employed for the last 42 odd years, who took out field guns and probably did more damage to Liberty Hall than the Helga actually did. And then on the 12th of July, we published a pamphlet by D.R. O'Connor Lycett, Rainer Lycett, as some people might know, who's written a lot on the Limerick Soviet and other issues in Irish history. Rainer is a long-standing member of the Society. He's in the 70s now. And when you think that other than the journal, we hadn't published a pamphlet since 2011, mainly because we didn't have any money. And two trade unions, SIPTU, are paying for the pamphlet on Ennis, and Unite the Union paid for mainly for the Rainer Lycett. And the Rainer Lycett one is from the GPO to the Winter Palace, so it takes in the Russian Revolution as well, and lessons to be learned from the two. So, and then on the 22nd of October, we had our autumn conference where we had 8 speakers, and that was mainly around leaving 1916 and entering 1917, a centenary on. So I think in the short period of time, what we have achieved is we don't spend as much time talking about events or about publications. We actually decided to do. And I suppose the last thing I want to say, well, I want to say 2 things. We spent £15,000 sterling to have 2 Irish Citizens Army uniforms conserved by a very reputable conservation company in Manchester, and we had them on display in Liberty Hall and elsewhere during the Centenary celebrations for 1916. Now those two units actually belong to Situ, but Situ wouldn't have had the money to pay for the conservation, but we did. Now we're still hoping against hope that we may get some funds back from a government agency, but I'm not holding my breath on that. But the last thing I'd like to say, I have had over the course of my years looked with great envy and awe about the mutual exchange between Irish, Scottish, Welsh and other what are euphemistically known as regional labour history bodies. And I have to say that I was delighted when Francis mentioned the possibility of coming to Glasgow. My own uncle Michael was a publican in Glasgow. He came here in 1961 and he was a publican into the 80s for one of the breweries. And I have a cousin, young Mike, in South Pollock-Shields. So, and my wife is in Perth today for the AGM of the Royal Scottish Country Dance Society. She's an Aberdeen lass. So I have all those associations, and as I said to Francie when we were making plans to come over, I hope this trip is a better memory for me than the last time I was in Glasgow when Scotland beat Ireland 1-0 on Parkhead. So I would like, on behalf of my committee, to say that it might be no harm for the two societies to consider the possibility of having some type of a joint event at some time in the future. And I think that there are some exciting years ahead in terms of our mutual history. And if I could stray for 1 second into contemporary times, I spoke the other day, one of the handles I have, as well as being on the National Executive Council of Situ, is I'm President of the Dublin District Council, and we would have about 58,000 trade union members in the Dublin area. And obviously the B word, Brexit, is on everybody's tongues. And in the manufacturing division where I was the other day, it has already affected the mushroom industry, which is mainly an industry populated in Ireland by international workers, and is a low-paid industry. And of course, in Ireland, there are pluses and minuses. In manufacturing and services, there are going to be minuses. In insurance and finance, there are definitely going to be pluses. I was saying to colleagues this week, and I've said it, there will be a lot of discourse, some of which is very disingenuous, about the ebbs and flows in relation to the negotiations, in relation to what will happen post-Brexit. But in my mind, there is every reason to believe that the peoples in Northern Ireland and Scotland who voted to remain should seek some common economic area within the European Union so as they can have mutual trading without tariffs and without taxation penalties. And to me, rather than blaming the media about decisions in the courts, people would be far better off looking into their hearts about what real democracy is about. The people in Scotland and Northern Ireland have voted a particular way. And as Francie said to me, maybe what's needed in Scotland is not a referendum about independence, but perhaps the idea should be a referendum about independence within the European Union. So with those cúpla focal, that's what I have to say. I'm also delighted that our visit here today has triggered my own union to send over the plaque for James Fearden, about which Francis is going to talk about upstairs in a while. My colleague Phelim Jennings is here from Newry. Fearden was a Newry man. He died here in Glasgow in 1924. And I know myself and Francis feel that there's still some unfinished business in that we haven't been able to find out much about his funeral and whether he's interred or whether he was cremated. And I would ask everybody actually who's here to do a bit of local digging to see if we can come up with those few pieces of information so as we could actually finally re-edit the obituary to James Fearden, the third James as he's known. And there's a nice little pamphlet outside which was written by a colleague of mine, Bill McGinley, who's a busman and a worker director in the state bus company, CIE. I think it was done in 2000, Francie? Yeah. And stands the test of time, but it just shows you that the Labour History Society, even 16 years ago, were thinking about coming to Glasgow for the unveiling of the plaque to James Fearden. Thank you all.
Thanks very much for a very diverting and interesting and useful commentary on the ups and downs of developing Labour history, something which is really very, very critical to all of us. You know, if we forget our history, we're in danger of making all the same mistakes over again. So it's very, very important for us to keep tabs on all of that and make sure that it doesn't wither and die. So I found that very, very instructive.